in any community or any network, there are a disproportionate number of connections. In other words, it's 80-20 rule. 80% of the connections are held by 20% of the people, or nodes if you're using a computer science, something like that, right? Which means that things can look wildly popular without actually being popular with a majority of people in that community, if the minority of people are the ones who are the most connected, right? So it can feel like everybody's talking about something, when in reality, 7 people are talking about something. Those people are just the 7 biggest influencers in that space, right? This is something that a lot of different people leverage when they're trying to break into an industry.
Hi guys, welcome to the show where we learn from the people who have followed their passion to achieve great success and have impacted many lives. If you're new here, then please do consider subscribing to this channel and don't forget to hit the bell icon. This episode is being recorded in association with Let's Localize, an organization with a mission to foster micro contributions from communities and businesses to support school for their need of time, skill, and money. To know more about Let's Localize, click on the card above or the link in description below. I'm your host Ajay Mathur, and my guest today is an entrepreneur, a globally sought after speaker, and a best-selling author. He has been ranked as one of the world's best business thought leader by Thinkers 50. He has written 4 best-selling books that have won many awards, and his books have been translated into dozens of languages. His work has been also featured in media outlets such as BBC, CNN, Fast Company, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, just to name a few. So please welcome the former business school professor whose TED Talk about why you should know your coworkers' pay has won him more than 2 million views, David Burkus. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. So there is a lot to talk to David because he has written so much about creativity, networking, and leadership. So today I will be mostly focusing on networking and your recent work in Pick a Fight. So a little bit on that. But before we go there, I wanted to know, you studied psychology and then you started writing books and started mentoring leaders in the industries. What inspires you? What's your why? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. It's funny. So if we're going to get into the whole story, the writing part came first. The organizational psychology part came second. Not a lot of people know that, but I'm just trying to make work not suck. Like work is too important of an experience for most people to have it drain them all the time and disengage them and frustrate them. Like I dream of a world where television shows like The Office aren't funny because nobody understands the jokes, right? Like people just have such a more positive experience of work. And we're obviously not there, and I'm not a naive optimist. I don't think we can get there anytime soon. But if we can move the needle a little bit, like that's enough for me. And if we can recruit other voices to that, that's enough as well. I think work is just too important not to suck.
That's interesting. So let's get into the work that you have done and about your recent audiobook, Pick a Fight. Right. So my question is, how do you go out and find the fight, like find your purpose? And you actually mentioned about Tom Bilyeu's story in the book. And I'm a super fan of Tom Bilyeu, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell us, how do you find that purpose?
Yeah, Tom is awesome. Tom is a pretty cool guy. I was lucky enough to get linked up with him and interviewed back in the Inside Quest days, which is when I first heard the story of starting Quest Nutrition. Which is just an amazing story. And again, a very sort of a fight-driven story. Here's where that sort of the idea of Pick a Fight came from, which was that a lot of organizations, I mean, it's 2020. Again, I know it feels like it's been 2020 for like 6 years now, but that's true. But for more than 20 years, organizations have known that purpose is important. Individuals have known that purpose is important. I mean, Start With Why was not the first book about the importance of purpose, but it's been the most popular one recently. And we get that, and organizations get that. And yet most organizations' mission statements still suck. Most employees couldn't actually name the organization's mission statement. And more importantly, and this is where companies like Quest are doing a phenomenal job, or at least we're doing under Tom. I honestly have no idea what it's been like since Tom left. But in that time and finding that, is that I think the problem, the reason for the disconnect isn't that these organizations don't have a purpose or that they're lying or anything like that. I think it's just naturally hard for organizations to make the connection between a vague, amorphous mission statement with things about shareholder value and innovation and blah, blah, blah in there and their own day-to-day job. The way I put it in Pick a Fight is that people don't want to join a company. They want to join a crusade or a cause or something bigger than themselves. And the organizations that can boil down what they do and why they do it to something that feels like a cause to join, those organizations help people see how their day-to-day life does that. To use Quest as a great example, Quest was started because Tom Bilyeu wanted to save the life of his mom and sister. They were morbidly obese. Most of the people in his family was. He went through a tremendous transformation through sheer self-discipline and realized that that wouldn't apply for most people. And so they got the idea that, okay, they need dietary changes. They need to do other things. And we're not going to change what they eat or how often they eat or anything like that. We can change the item that they eat, right? We're not going to change them from eating candy bars, but if we can make a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe we can change what they get consumed. And maybe over time we can bring that down. And so when I went to, I think it was 2016, I went to Quest, I went to go be interviewed by Tom, and I talked to a bunch of different people. And to a person, if you ask them, hey, what do you do here? Like, what do you do at Quest? And that was my default question, because you meet people and say, you know, what do you do here? And you're expecting, oh, I'm a brand manager, or oh, you're expecting a functional answer. But to a person, they said, well, we're trying to end metabolic disease, right? Notice the question was, what do you do here? And the answer was, we're trying to end metabolic disease. In other words, this is what we're fighting for. And so I started using that as my question when I'm working with an organization to try and figure out, have people actually made the cognitive leap between your stated purpose and their day-to-day work? The way that I judge that is, can they answer the question, what are we fighting for? And I love the fight rhetoric for that reason. Like, I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA for like 15 years. So I like the fight thing. I grew up in Philadelphia, which is the land of Rocky, right? But I get it if you don't want to be that analogy. I change it to cause sometimes. I'm not talking about conflict. I'm especially not talking about competitor versus competitor. But when I say, what are we fighting for? If people can take the existing company's mission and go, you know, I never even thought about it as a fight, but this is what we're fighting for, then you've done a great job in that organization, helping them feel that sense of purpose or cause in their life. So it's like a twofold test. The first is, do you even have that purpose? And then, do you understand what I mean when I say fight? And if you do, then you have a strong enough purpose to affect people's day-to-day work.
Yeah, when I looked at the title of the book, I was like, what kind of fight are we talking here? I ended up reading your sample chapters and read a lot on your website about Pick a Fight. So that's quite cool. And one thing that I came to know, that you mentioned about 3 types of fights: the revolutionary, underdog, and ally fight. Could you tell us a little bit more about them, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And notice, none of those are about your competitors. That's the big thing that I think people make the assumption about when they say, oh, pick a fight. I don't want to pick a fight with the competitors and this and that. I don't either, right? I want something bigger than that. So like the revolutionary fight, for example, is about transforming the industry. Organizations are in a revolutionary fight when they can say, the industry finds this acceptable and we refuse to accept that, right? So, I mean, to give you a quick example of that, running off camera to grab my cell phone. My cell phone has a case on it from a company called Pila. Pila is an amazing Vancouver-based company that makes cell phone cases and now sunglasses out of farming byproduct that can biodegrade if composted, right? In other words, Pila recognizes that it's not even enough to make products out of recycled plastic. If we want to have a waste-free future where we're a closed loop and we're not creating waste, then we need to make consumable products out of something that is waste-free, and they're fighting for that. You ask a single person what they're trying to do, they're trying to change the industry to change what gets consumed. So that's the revolutionary fight. The underdog fight is about proving the critics wrong. It's not just about being the little guy, right? Or the little girl, or the little company. That can be it. But it's about being on the receiving end of negative judgment and striving to prove why that criticism is unfounded, why that criticism is wrong, right? My favorite example here, like I said, I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm a big fan of Rocky. And what are we at? Like 19 of them now, except Rocky 5. I'm not the biggest fan of that one. I watch most of them on Netflix. Netflix is an amazing underdog story example, not because they were small and they knocked off Blockbuster, but because Blockbuster actually had the opportunity to purchase Netflix, when it was going out of business in its early days and decided, you're not worth it. You're hemorrhaging money. You're not a valuable investment. They rejected them. And what Reed Hastings and the other founders got out of that was a rejection story they took back to their people and said, Blockbuster doesn't even understand us. They don't understand the future. Here's how we're going to prove them wrong. And they got them something that could motivate them enough to get to the point where they could prove Blockbuster wrong and put Blockbuster into bankruptcy, right? So that's the underdog fight. And the very last one is the ally fight. The ally fight's actually the simplest one because it's not about you at all. It's about them. The ally fight says it's not what we're fighting for, it's what they're fighting for. And here's how we help them. And them could be a customer, them could be a stakeholder, them could be society. It's just the idea that there is a fight out there. And by being in business, we help those people win it. My favorite example here actually is the Hershey Foods Company. I know you're in London, so I'm guessing you're more of a Cadbury fan, but I'm a massive Hershey Foods fan. Milton Hershey, the founder of Hershey Foods, before he passed away, had started a school for biological and societal orphans, a boarding school where I say boarding, but it's actually house parents and that sort of thing for biological and societal orphans. And before he died, he changed his estate so that the ownership of the Hershey Foods Company is with a trust that manages that school. So the majority shareholder to this day, 100 years later, of the Hershey Foods Company is a nonprofit school for orphans. You don't have to tell anyone at Hershey who they're fighting for. They know it. They see it across the street when they look at that, across the street from their headquarters, when they look at that school every day. Like, that's a great ally fight. It's not even about their customers per se, but they have a clearly defined them, what those kids are fighting for, which is a better shot at life. And here's how we help them just by doing the business that we do.
That's interesting. And you mentioned that there is no competition in any of these. And I think, does that relate to the concept of superordinate goals while you're working in different teams and resolving conflicts? Or am I?
Yeah. So, and when I say conflict, I mean around a competitor thing. It's twofold, right? That why I think missions like maximizing shareholder value, marketplace leadership, which is about being the dominant shareholder, or even just our fight is we're Coca-Cola and we're trying to fight Pepsi-Cola. Like, the reason that doesn't motivate people is twofold. The first is not superordinate goals. The first is just people's careers are incredibly transient right now. Your star employees might get recruited away to go work for that competitive organization. So good luck trying to motivate them to go to work to destroy a competitive company that they might get a better salary and a bigger signing bonus from in a year, right? And they know that. Who won the war for talent? Talent won, because talent knows that organizations need them more than they need organizations. And so it's just not going to work. They want to work for some bigger cause. The other thing is that often competitive companies are fighting the same fight. They're just fighting it a little bit differently. And this is where in the book, we talk about superordinate goals, and we talk about Apple and Microsoft, actually. We talk about Steve Jobs, who did a great job motivating a couple people inside Apple and a lot of consumers to have this hate for Microsoft until Apple was in trouble, because that fight didn't actually motivate a massive number of people. And he had to go ask for basically a bailout from Microsoft and a commitment that Microsoft would keep making products for the Apple computer system, right? When they realized that their competitive fight had put them out of business, it took a mindset shift in Jobs, who had always been that sort of competitor. And one of the unfortunate things about Jobs actually is I don't get the impression he learned the lesson, right? Because all he really did was switch. And once the iPhone came out, he started picking fights with Google and the Android operating system and a bunch of other stuff, right? So that competitive thing, I look back at him and I go, Jobs accomplished a lot, was kind of a jerk to some people. And I often wonder, what more could he have accomplished if he had had the same mentality that Bill Gates, who, by the way, is like on the front lines of helping cure this COVID madness that we're in now, because he's worth more than Jobs was and built a much more dominant system of Microsoft, had a bigger mindset that what we're trying to do is democratize information and bring the ability to change your life circumstances through technology to everyone all over the world. That's a much bigger fight than we're just trying to be the number one computing platform. And he got that and had always sort of had that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now that you have touched upon COVID, I'm also coming to your another book, which is about friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, that goes in one loop.
We just call it friend of a friend, but you're right. The cover just goes on and on and on, because that's how life goes.
Yeah, exactly. So now that we are only talking or networking on computers virtually like this, what is your top strategy to do networking like this?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So when I wrote the book in 2018, the biggest objection for a lot of people was the biggest thing they didn't like about networking was they associated networking with events. I don't want to go to that meetup. I don't want to go to that happy hour. I don't want to go to that cocktail hour after the conference. I want to go back to my hotel room and answer my email, right? And even if I do go, it's awkward, it's weird, etc. And one of the core messages of Friend of a Friend when it came out 2 years ago was you don't have to do any of that stuff, because that stuff stems from a mentality that networking is about meeting strangers and just trying to run up the score and the number of people that you know. And it's not actually about that. It's about understanding the network that's around you, that you're already connected to, and the people that you are a friend of, and building out from there. And when you do that, you have much better success. So my most common thing was like, you could skip mixers and cocktail hours forever now, if you commit to doing a couple things. Number one, you commit to reaching back out to your dormant ties, people you know, but you don't know that well, right? People that you're connected to, but you haven't talked to in a while. And I'll be honest, in a COVID era, it feels like everyone is a dormant tie, right? A lot of us, especially in the early months, really just sort of laser focused in on what do we need to do to keep our family safe? What do we need to do to keep our job, keep working? What do we need to do to get projects done? And forgot about this sort of broader network. Then a couple weeks in, the extroverts who suffered the most started planning Zoom happy hours, right? I'm sure I don't know if you planned one, you definitely got invited to one. I'm sure I can tell it in your eyes.
Yeah.
And those were fun for about a week and a half. And then we realized these are just as boring as all the old ones. That's not what I mean when I say dormant ties. What I mean is this sort of one-on-one conversations, just pinging people. Because the interesting thing about weak and dormant ties is we know that they have as likely a chance to get you the information you need to find a new job opportunity or solve a problem that you're dealing with, or anything. Networks provide information, anything you need information about. The people who are closest to you think like you. And so they probably already have the same solutions you have. They're going to bring you ideas you already thought of. People who are strangers don't think like you. So that's why we thought it was about running up the score with strangers. Your dormant ties, people you know but you haven't talked to in a couple of years, those people have just as much new information as strangers, but they're not strangers, right? You already know them. So that was my big recommendation to a lot of people before COVID, BC, right? And now we're in common era, COVID era. That was my recommendation to a lot of people. And the number one response I would get is, oh, but it's so awkward. I agree with you. It's totally awkward to reach back out to somebody you haven't talked to in 2 years, which is why you need to do it. But what I've learned since about March 15th, right? Depending on your country, it's about a different date somewhere in March, but I pin it at March 15th was sort of the oh crap moment. Since about March 15th of this year, I don't know a single person who hasn't positively responded to a quick email or text message that says, hey, Ajay, I was thinking about you today and I hope you're well. Love to catch up with you sometime when we can, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about you and I hope you're doing well. I hope you're holding up, right? That message is no longer awkward to send in this weird era that we're in, right? And so that's become an even bigger part of my recommendations for people for networking. Stop trying to run up the score on strangers. Start trying to reconnect with that dormant network and then see where that goes. You're going to end up meeting strangers through referral recommendations and that kind of stuff, but start there. And that's something you can do totally remotely. That's something that you can do and people will be receptive to now because we're starved for those well wishes.
That's really useful because I've reached out to so many people who I have not spoken in years, including my college classmates. And then we are now having regular chats and knowing more about each other. So which is really working, like, as you said. There is one thing that you mentioned about people used to relate networking to events, but that is not the case. But there is another demography, which is the young people, the students. Some of them believe that having a good fan following on the social media networks is actually your networking. I wanted to know from you, being the master of networking, how will you teach children what exactly is networking? It's just not your followers and the people who are liking you.
Yeah. I mean, there's a difference between an audience and a network, right? An audience wants something from you. They want that TikTok dance video, right? Or they want that quote image on Instagram or something like that. That doesn't necessarily mean they want a connection with you. They just want you to give them the content that they wanted. Now, it can work, but a way better strategy if you're using social media isn't to try and build an audience, but to try and find a conversation. In other words, who are the people that are already talking about the stuff that's relevant to your industry or where you want to go in your career and that sort of thing? And how can you jump into the conversation? The other irony there, by the way, is that you end up in some social networks, you end up with more followers if you go that route anyway. So I'll give you a great example. For me, I'm not the biggest fan of Twitter. I was in 2008, 9, 10, because it was this amazing place where a conversation was happening. And then it sort of just turned into media outlets tweeting out the stories that were on their websites, hoping you would follow them, right? And then about a year ago, I started diving back into the conversation. What are the hashtags that people in my industry are using? Who are the people to follow? Some of them already have audiences, but most of them, who are the people to follow that are trying to have a conversation? And then can I start conversing with those people out loud while other people sort of watch, right? And also comment in and whatever. And I've made some really, really fun connections there. I've also increased the number of followers I have on Twitter, but that's not the point. The point is I found interesting connections there, which is funny. I never thought to do it on Twitter, except that I had seen it happening on LinkedIn for years. And that was my dominant recommendation. So now it's my recommendation for every social media platform. In my book, In Friend of a Friend, I would call this seeking out silos or finding clusters. That used to be an in-person thing. Find the conference for people who want to do what you want to do and make sure you're there meeting those people, and especially meeting the people who are further along on the road you want to travel. In the era that we're in right now, that's a conversation that's usually happening on one or two of the, what are we at, 5 major social media networks at this point? I can't even keep track of it. But that's what you want to be looking for. It doesn't matter if you end up building a huge following or just a tiny following. What matters is, are you in the conversation? That's going to build you connections, not an audience.
You mentioned about Adam Rifkin, the guy who's supposedly the best networker in the world by Forbes, right? And you mentioned that you and him probably had a discussion, and you came to know that he thinks that he does networking like the computer networks.
Yeah.
I just couldn't digest that, and I just wanted to know more about how exactly, what does that mean?
Yeah, so Adam's really interesting. Adam was profiled in Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, that I read. And Adam Grant is also a friend of mine, and Give and Take is a great book. But I read it and I was like, I don't know that you captured Adam Rifkin's story here, because the most interesting things to me about his story were the way he would talk about how he doesn't really like networking, how he's a shy introvert. In fact, the first time that Adam connected me to Adam and I emailed Adam's response was, I'm not really a networker. Like, I know you found the article and you read me and give it, but I'm not really a networker. I was like, that's a really weird. I mean, the number one networker in the world also thinks that networkers are those people with 3-piece suits and slick back hair who work in the room, putting business cards in everybody's hand. Those people we all hate, right? So Rifkin didn't want to be one of those. He just said, I think about networks the way I think about people. And that was really interesting to me, because I'd already started reading network science studies that were published in sociology journals and in psychology journals, but not journals of computer science or mathematics or those sort of things. But it's an interdisciplinary field. Rifkin has a PhD in computer science. So Rifkin thinks about how people connect the same way that he thinks about how computers connect, how websites connect. I mean, most network science studies that are done in a computer world now are usually done, thanks to Google, are usually done tracking hyperlinks to and from what websites, right? To track how the ecosystem of one study, for example, looked at newspaper publications in the United States, left-leaning bias versus right-leaning bias based on who's citing articles from who else, right? But one of the interesting things when you look at the internet as a whole, and this was Rifkin's point, that we don't often think about when we look at people as networks, is that the internet has a level of resiliency. You could not kill the internet, right? Some countries have tried, but you can't block it, you can't kill it, because there's too many redundant connections. There's too many people connected to each other. I mean, we talk about people in 6 degrees of separation. The internet is like 2 degrees of separation between computer servers and all of that sort of stuff. And so what Rifkin started to realize is that people networks should probably work the same way. In a community of people who are striving to the same end, there should probably be a lot of resilience here, the same way we would have in an internet system or a company computer access system. We want that resiliency. So he decided that his goal wasn't to accumulate the most number of connections, but to make sure that the people who he was connected to were connected with each other. I mean, he actually wanted to take himself out of the picture by making the network as a whole so resilient that everybody was connected to everybody. And ironically, what happened is he ended up at the center of that network, and he ended up the world's best networker by Forbes in 2007, 2008, whenever it was. But he did it because he was trying to make the community of tech entrepreneurs, especially the 106 Miles community, which is what we talk about in the book, the community of Bay Area tech entrepreneurs so resilient that no one person controlled all the connections, or that there wasn't even a power law of people that had all those connections, just that everybody was connected to everybody. And in doing so, he created a beautiful gift. And the community that he created that gift for rewarded him in kind as well.
Mm. So once you are in a good network, now you want to make use of that network in some way or form. And then comes how you can influence your network, right? I want to understand it based on the concept of majority illusion, how to use that in order to grow your network and make the best out of it.
Well, I'm not sure it's the best tool to use right away, but it's a really useful tool for explaining what's actually happening. If that makes sense.
Explain what it is to.
Right. So the majority illusion, real fast, is this idea that in any community or any network, there are a disproportionate number of connections. In other words, it's 80-20 rule. 80% of the connections are held by 20% of the people, or nodes if you're using a computer science, something like that, right? Which means that things can look wildly popular without actually being popular with the majority of people in that community, if the minority of people are the ones who are the most connected, right? So it can feel like everybody's talking about something, when in reality, 7 people are talking about something. Those people are just the 7 biggest influencers in that space, right? This is something that a lot of different people leverage when they're trying to break into an industry. I talk in the book about Tim Ferris trying to break into the tech community with a book about how to not work 80 hours a week, et cetera, which was a message that community definitely needed to hear. He was targeting 18 to 29-year-old tech savvy males. And so he sought out who were the biggest influencers, connectors, et cetera, to that. And he spent months building a relationship with them. And that's the thing I think gets overlooked by a lot of people, is we just think, oh, I just need to figure out who the popular people are and spam them. That's not what we're talking about here, right? What we're talking about here is entering into a community, building social capital in that community, creating value for that community, but paying attention, learning about that community, and learning who the most influential people are over time, so that you know who, when it comes time to spread an idea, would be that most influential people to go to, right? So I don't look at it as a transactional thing. I look at it as something to pay attention to, especially when you're trying to change or influence a network, something to pay attention to. But it rarely works unless you're already a small scale member of that community, creating value for that community, building a relationship with people in that community, right? It's really hard to do it from zero to that. But once you're a member of that community, it can become really easy to grow the number of connections you have quickly by understanding who the most connected people are and putting yourself near them.
How do you strengthen the relationship with those influential people in that network, considering that, of course, you have a lot to learn from them, but who will answer what's in it for them? Why should they have interest in you?
Yeah, so in the book, we talk about a totally different concept called multiplexity. And multiplexity is a fancy term network scientists use for the idea that everyone has different contexts for connection, right? Meaning there's different reasons that people, there's different uncommon commonalities that people have in a community, things they have in common that nobody else has, or reasons they see each other outside of that community, right? So think about a company, right? If you're an organization, everyone in that community is technically connected to everyone else because they're all employees. But some of those employees' kids go to the same school. And some of those employees go to the same yoga studio on Wednesday afternoons, right? And the things that you can do to try and understand and build multiplex connections with people in a community, when you're the new member, when you're the one like you're talking about, you're trying to build influence in that, usually the multiplex path is the better one. I'll give you an example of this in practice. So 2013, my first book came out, and it did okay. It took a lot of investment of time and money in publicity, which is a very outdated marketing method that I didn't understand at the time because I was a new, dumb author, right? And midway through the launch of that book, I met a guy who was, and still probably is, like the world's number one or number two book marketing thinker, consultant, whatever you want to call, strategist, whatever you want to call him. And I met him and I asked, would you help me? And he said no. And I get why he said no, because he's getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to work with way bigger name authors. Over time, though, we built a tiny bit of a relationship. And eventually I figured out that, and I hinted at this earlier about the fight analogy, I figured out that he had started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is the wrestling foundation of MMA fighters and a really esoteric, weird art that's also amazing because I can go to any city in the world and find a BJJ gym and build a community. But anyway, I found out that he had started that. I had been training at that for like 10 years at black belts in that. I found an ability to create value for him. And all I did at first was start commenting on the little videos he would post on Facebook from his matches or drilling this technique. And I would go, hey, you should do this. You should shift your hip here. You should just give him a little bit of feedback on that, build it up, right? And then by 2016, he not only helped work on that campaign for me, he did not charge me for it. He came to me and he said, hey, I have an idea. I'll work with you and I won't even charge you if you let me record all of our conversations so that I have you as sort of a case study of what to do for other clients. I was like, sure, I will get the advice from the smartest person in the world on this topic for free in exchange for a recording. So that's what we did, right? Never would have happened had I not found a multiplex tie to him, a different thing in common than this other sort of world. So that's what I tell a lot of people, especially younger people, to pay attention to. Right? If you're in an organization and you want to get ahead, if you're under 29 years old, your number one way you could probably build multiplex connections or level the playing field of who can help who with what is by watching the way senior leaders interact with technology and volunteering to get in there and help with some of that stuff. Especially now, right? If you haven't figured it out, most corporate leaders are terrible at Zoom and like Microsoft Teams and all that other stuff. So just providing a little bit of help with, hey, let me think through this, or let me do this, or how about I be the tech person during our next team meeting so that you don't have to worry about who's on mute and not. You can just run the meeting and I'll run all the tech side. Like these are little things you can do to create an equal power relationship, even though it's happening in two different domains or what we call multiplex ties. So that'd be my biggest piece of advice. And then you do that, obviously, in something like the majority illusion, you start doing it to the people that you can't provide any value to them in the community you want. You can provide this value, but when the time comes for them to want to help you with the project, they're not going to help you in that same technology bend or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That guy has nothing useful to offer me to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So they make up for it in that other realm. And what I hate about this, by the way, I just want to say, it sounds super transactional and super deliberate, and that's the sleaziness level. That's not what we're talking about. The better mentality isn't to deliberately stake this out. I didn't deliberately go, oh, I need to find an in with this guy. I just started trying to build a relationship with him in a variety of different, and I accidentally found a way that I could create value and I decided to do it. And that's the approach that I take with every relationship, is just how can I provide value? And my assumption is that I can rarely provide people value in the domain of their expertise. So I better learn about other things in their life, and maybe I can provide value there.
Yeah. So find a common interest. And if you don't have one, then develop one.
Yeah. And start training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You never know how helpful it'll be.
Any other tips to become a super connector, especially in the virtual world?
I think so. We've got that idea of reaching back out to weak and dormant ties. We've got that idea of majority illusion, et cetera. I think the big thing we need to think about now is as you're trying to expand your network, they're going to come through your friend of a friend. Mm-hmm. And the time to ask and get a feel for what I call the fringes of your network, the time to do that is not when you need something. The time to do that is when you're trying to learn what you need something, right? So what I encourage people to do is to be constantly trying to learn about something new and constantly asking the question, who do you know in blank, to build those connections out. So I'll give you another personal example. 2018, I flipped from audio podcasts. I shut that down and I started doing a lot with video, with YouTube, and video was just started on LinkedIn and other platforms. So I was just trying to do a lot with video. And so I asked my existing network, who do you know in film and television? I'm not trying to get a contract in Hollywood, but I am trying to learn of what I need to know about cameras and lighting and all of that sort of stuff. I'm just trying to learn. And when you're trying to learn, people are much more receptive to that than when you're trying to get help or you're trying to meet new people to grow your business or whatever. So do it early and do it under that trying to learn. Pick a topic that is fringe of what you do, but what you do would be helped by learning more about that. Commit to learning about it and then broadcast that you're learning about it and say, who do you know that works in this field? Because I just want to learn about it. And again, now is a time where people are willing to have those conversations much more than I've ever seen. Like, we're still busy, but we're not, it used to be that people would never want to like, oh, I don't want coffee. I don't want you to pick my brain. I don't want any of that sort of stuff. But hey, you know, so-and-so connected me to you and said you're an expert on lighting in film. Could I have 15 minutes on Zoom just to ask you a couple questions because I can't find the answers online? 15 minutes isn't that bad. We have the ability to keep it to 15 minutes, right? And the idea that you might know something that the internet can't solve is flattering. People actually sort of enjoy that, right? So that's what I would encourage. That's the last piece in terms of this COVID era networking that I would encourage people to do. Keep exploring the fringes of your network. Find those friend of a friends.
And most importantly, ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't ask for a specific person. Ask who do you know in blank so that you're asking open-ended.
Yeah. So out of interest, I can see a lot of books behind you. You already have authored 4 books. Probably there would be more to come. I wanted to ask you, how the books have changed your life? So tell us about your reading journey a little bit.
Yeah. Wait, do you mean how has writing my books changed my life, or how do
reading? Because not everybody who is listening to us is an author, but they are most likely readers.
Yeah. So, you know, my story is really interesting. So I was English, even in grade school, English was my favorite subject. Wasn't actually a subject I was good at. In our standardized tests, I would always score better in math than in language. I wasn't a big fan of grammar rules. That was a big problem for me. I'm still not a big fan of them. But that's what I decided I wanted to be. I went to university as an undergraduate to study English and creative writing. And in that, I mean, I thought at the time that meant novelist, right? I was reading literary stuff like your Jack Kerouac and Ernest Hemingway. And I was reading trash thrillers. I was just trying to get a feel for like what type of, because when you're 18 years old, you think writing in books means fiction, right? And that's what I thought. And then in one of the classes, I got exposed to narrative nonfiction. That somehow led me down this rabbit trail to read some of Malcolm Gladwell's original New Yorker pieces, which were this interesting blend of social science and storytelling. And that's what changed my life more than anything else, right? Was wow, the idea that you could use the same narrative tools that fiction writers use, but you're talking about something that's true, and you're talking about something that's helpful, and you're helping people see the world and themselves in that world a little bit better. This is fascinating. It also helps that Malcolm Gladwell isn't struggling to eat the way a lot of fiction writers are, right? So that was part of the reason for that shift as well. So that's been a huge part of it. And then even now, I mean, I still read a decent amount of fiction, but I read way more nonfiction, because even now it just strikes me as the highest return on investment you could have. I mean, I think it was Seth Godin that told me this, and not me personally. I mean, I listened to it in an interview. I've only ever talked to Seth personally once in an elevator, and it was like 45 seconds long. But I listened to an interview one time, and he said, like, what a deal. Like, for $20, you get 200 pages of some experts thinking on a topic. Like, that's better than a college class. That's better than a documentary series. Like, that's a crazy deal. And if you follow that person over time, that author over time, you get to see how their thoughts evolve, and you're still only paying $15 to $20 a peak. It's amazing, right? So yeah, so I would say, you know, they changed my lives in those 2 ways. The first is that just that I always wanted to be an author, but what I wanted to write changed dramatically and put me on a really positive path. And then even now, just the idea that for like $20, and by the way, the other fun thing when you become an author, I recommend everybody do it. When you become an author, people reach out to you and say, come on my show. And you get to have really interesting conversations with people that live half a world away from you, which for networking purposes is awesome.
Awesome. Totally agree with you. And yeah, books actually change the way you think. That's in my experience, definitely.
Yeah.
Right. So David, there's one question that I ask all my guests, which is, what are the top 3 skills according to you, which everybody needs in order to grow and be successful, but these skills or behaviors are not taught in schools?
Yeah. So when you sent me that question ahead of time, and I started thinking about primary school, right? And like K through 12, high school in particular, last 4 years. And I have a very, very diverse set of answers. The first is personal finance. It bothers me that that's not mandatory. There's some schools that offer it as an elective, but like that you shouldn't be able to graduate with a bachelor's degree without understanding how interest rates work. We would save a lot of headache. You shouldn't be able to graduate middle school, because if you think about society, that's probably where we need it. So that's number one. Number 2 would be statistics. We're as an American, we're recording this about a week away from an election season, which means everybody's looking at polls and opinion polls and all of this stuff, and everybody's bloviating about their opinion of what these things mean. Well, polls are a statistical tool, and when you understand statistics and what margin of error means, and that you also need to look at sampling rates and all of that sort of thing, people would be a lot more savvy about the information in the world around them if they understood statistics. Even like the reason that fad diets are able to be so trendy and make millions of dollars and not help anyone and then disappear and get replaced by another one is that most of them are based on like one terribly run study published in a journal nobody cares about that will never be replicated, but we got that study's author a book deal, right? And if most people had the ability to understand statistics and go, there's not a lot here, we would be in a much better scenario. And then I'm super biased, man. I think everybody should train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or some form of martial art. I think it just makes, I think we know that mindfulness research is, an amazing topic. I just think full contact mindfulness in the form of martial arts works better. It also builds that sort of growth mentality, growth mindset in a lot of people. And so that I think should start early. Like my kids are 8 and 6 and they do it. So yeah, those are my 3: personal finance, statistics, and some form of martial arts.
Is that behind you? I can see some sort of belts. Are they martial art?
Yeah. So both of these are for jiu-jitsu competitions. This one I actually won 2 days before my son was born. It's a really sort of funny story where my wife was pregnant, we were expecting, and I was kind of like, do you think it's today? She's like, no. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to drive over to this other city where there's a competition going on and enter. And I ended up winning, which was awesome. I do also have, oh, you can't even see it on this one. I also have like old school replica of the pancrase, which was one of the first MMA things. So I have some replica ones in there too, but these 2 that you can see, those I actually earned. Well, a younger, fitter version of me earned them. I should say that.
So what is your mission going forward? What is your future plan after you've written 4 books, maybe more to come?
Well, the experience of work still sucks, so I'll still be at it. So we have a book coming out in early part of next year around remote work and remote teams. I think that's not going away. I don't say that because like COVID's going to keep us locked down forever, but that even when it's safe, like we've been in this forced work from home experiment for long enough to disrupt people's patterns. And especially your top performers, they're not going to want to go back to an office 8 to 5 days a week. So this idea, I don't think it's work from home in perpetuity. I think we should be thinking about it as working from anywhere. And what can we do to empower organizations and then also empower individuals to work from anywhere? So that's been the subject of a book that I wrote sort of during lockdown, right? Newton discovered calculus during quarantine. I wrote a 200-page book. His was a much bigger deal. Although technically he stole it from Leibniz. So I guess that wasn't that big a deal. Anyway, but that'll be coming out and that'll be the focus of a lot of 2021, 2022 for me, is talking about how does this experience of work change when people still have that ability to work from anywhere.
That'll be very interesting. And going forward, I think we'll be having quite a lot of books and material to read about remote working and how to be influential in virtual worlds. So I'm looking forward to it. All the best and congratulations for having a new book already in plan.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So finally, David, how can people reach you if they want to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm fortunate in that David Burkus is a really weird esoteric name. There's not a lot of Burkuses out there. So davidburkus.com, burkus.com is probably the easiest place. Knowing you, AJ, and knowing your show, there'll be a link somewhere around this video to it as well. I hope you click on that. And I hope if you're watching this, you connect with me there, because everything we've talked about today is not an instruction, it's a conversation. And I'd love to keep that conversation going.
Thank you very much. And there is a lot we can talk to you about. We had only touched the tip of the iceberg, really. But thank you very much, David. It was a really interesting conversation. I totally enjoyed it. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, guys, if you are interested in creativity, leadership, and networking, and remote networking now, then please do check out his website. There is quite a lot of interesting conversations, and he also releases videos now. I keep watching on LinkedIn. It's quite active. I will put all the links down here. And if you have not yet done so, then please do consider subscribing to this channel by clicking the subscribe button. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because that is going to notify you when I'm uploading a new video, which is happening every week. I will see you again next time. Till then, take care.